Jadip, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to enter through my official email ID also.
Okay.
It is saying joining meeting. If you see it, then let me in. Rajarshi M, that user ID would be.
I'm not getting you, but I'm looking at it.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Bhaskar Aisa?
Hello.
Oh, sir. Sir, postu paise no, sir?
পাইছো তুমি হেৰিটো অন কৰি ল'ব পাৰিবা হেৰিটো
Oh, sir.
ভিডিঅ'টো অন কৰি ল'বা
Oh, sir. Sir, PC sir সোমাইছে নে?
স্যাৰ চাই আছো মই তালে তুমি কেমেৰাটো চেক কৰি আছনে এবাৰ অকমান ওপৰলৈ বেছি কাটি গৈছে it's okay fine great
Professor Majumdar sir, welcome.
Hello.
Sir. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are things
Okay,
over
sir.
there?
Yeah, probably you have met Bhaskar, no?
I think I had met him.
He was in OKD. Yeah, he was in OKD also.
I had met him when
Yes, sir. I was in
first time
OKD as a scholar.
I went to OKD during that Assam Human Development thing.
Yes. VC sir has entered. Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
আমি স্টার্ট করব পারো নাকি
সব আইছে না
Sir.
আৰু 1 মিনিট মান ৰৈ দিও
Vice Chancellor sir, VC sir se join কৰা নাই নেকি তেওঁলোকে?
আহিলে স্যার আহিলে
আহিছে Oh, I see, I see. Good afternoon, respected dignitaries, participants, research scholars from across the country. We are starting this event on climate change. And in fact, it is my proud privilege to inform before this August gathering that Krishnakanta Hendrik State University's Suryakumar Bhaya School of Social Sciences has taken the initiative to organize monthly lecture series on different important topics. So we have started since March 2021, and this is the second lecture on that series. And today's lecture is on climate change and Indian economy. We have among us Professor Rajarshi Majumdar from the Department of Economics, Borodan University, West Bengal. And as chairperson, we have Professor Madhurya Prasad Bezburua, sir. Sir, welcome you all, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. So we also have Professor Kondappa Das, sir, Vice Chancellor of Krishnakanta Hendrik State Open University, as the inaugural speaker in the event. So welcoming you all once again, I request Professor Kondappa Das, sir, Vice Chancellor of Krishnakanta Hendrik State Open University, to kindly introduce the topic among the participants.
Do I have to introduce the topic, or somebody from the school will introduce the topic?
No, sir.
Sir,
You are requested to make the introductory remarks so that it can be a kind of keynote and also the opening.
Just an introductory speech.
Okay. So good afternoon to you all. At the outset, on behalf of the university, Krishnakanta Hendrik State Open University, I welcome the speaker of today's webinar, Professor Rajarshi Majumdar from Bardhaman University. Next, I welcome Professor M.P. Bezburua from Guwahati University, who will be chairing and moderating today's session. Faculty members of the university, other participants, and my dear friends. It is indeed a ritual kind of a thing when whenever the university departments organize some lectures, seminar, workshop. So it's kind of a ritual part that the Vice Chancellor comes and joins and inaugurates. So in that sense, I'm here, but nevertheless, I'm privileged to be present here in the midst of August gathering and eminent speakers. Now, the topic chosen by the School of Social Sciences, it's the climate change and the Indian economy. In fact, the School of Social Sciences has been organizing a series of lectures on various topics, which we found that were very relevant during the COVID situation. Now, for the last 1 year, or maybe a little more, the universities, colleges, schools, all academic activities almost, which we normally used to conduct face-to-face in a conventional mode, has been closed down. And all of us have opted the option to organize these activities through online mode. Now, this may be one disadvantage, but at the same time, it's an advantage, because this particular online method has made it possible for us to invite resource persons across the globe who have been speaking on various topics. And today also we have to very eminent economists amongst us. It's actually the online mode has made it possible to invite them to this webinar. So I take it positively, this situation, and I believe that the School of Social Sciences at Krishna Kanda Handicap State Open University has rightly decided to organize this series of lectures despite having a tough time and very depressing kind of atmosphere in the society. I definitely will not have the audacity to comment on the topic. I am basically a layman in this field. I also understand of any other layman like what the climate change can mean for the economy of a country. I do not have any expert opinion on that, so I don't want to comment on that. But it is our privilege to have Raj Majumdar to have with us, who will be speaking in this, and also Professor MP Bezburwa, who is an eminent economist, not only of the state but also of the country. So I, on behalf of the university, once again welcome both of them. Welcome to our university, and I congratulate the School of Social Sciences for organizing this webinar on this very relevant topic. So once again, thanking you all, I formally inaugurate this lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have always been an inspiration to all of us. I now request Director of School of Social Sciences, Professor Joydeep Purva sir, to kindly introduce the speaker and chairperson of this session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, and Dean Academic, my colleagues, and participants of this webinar, a special lecture indeed. A very good afternoon to all. I take the privilege of introducing our speaker and chairperson of this afternoon. Today's special web lecture on climate change and Indian economy, vulnerabilities and resilience will be delivered by Professor Rajarshi Majumdar, who is an acclaimed academic as well as very dear and long-time friend of mine. He teaches economics in the University of Bardhaman, West Bengal. His interests and works span wide range of issues, from regional development to environmental economics, and from labor market and to economics of energy and infrastructure. He has been a visiting professor to University of Mumbai, as well as Guwahati University. He has published extensively in leading academic journals, which include his books, Intergenerational Mobility, a Study of Social Classes in India, Glimpses from Bengal, an Empirical Account, Infrastructure and Development in India, Interlinkages and Policy Issues, besides other significant research papers. He won the prestigious Sanjay Thakur Young Labour Economist Award from Indian Society of Labour Economics in 2007. He also edits the Journal of Regional Development and Planning and is a member of the advisory board, editorial advisory board of the Indian Journal of Labour Economics. It gives me immense pleasure in introducing our speaker and welcoming him to this today's web lecture. I am also honored and privileged to welcome Professor Madhurya Prasad Bezburwa sir, who very kindly agreed to chair the lecture as well as moderate the sessions of question answers. In fact, sir does not need any introduction. Most of us present here today probably are either his students or colleagues. He is a well-known economist and teaches economics in Guwahati University. His works include diverse range of issues related to agriculture, development, food security, social sector, labor, employment, industrialization, and so on. His books, Indian Agriculture After Green Revolution, Changes and Challenges, Identity, Aspirations, Development Backlogs and Governance Issues in Northeast India, Indo-Myanmar Cross-Border Trade, Agricultural Growth and Regional Economic Development, Technological Transformation of Agriculture, a study from Assam, amply testify his wide-ranging concerns and academic interest, and a key force in making Northeast Economic Association (NEA) a leading academic body in the region and the country. We welcome you, sir, to this program and request you kindly to take the program forward. Thank you.
Yeah, shall I?
Yeah.
I hope I'm visible and audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. So first of all, let me thank both Krishnakanta Handikoi State Open University and its Pujya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Sciences, for having me here in this very important lecture program as a chairman. That is a great honor. And these two names of Krishnakanta Handikoi and Pujya Kumar Bhuya itself, sort of it inspires a lot of awe. These two have been a great scholars of Assam. So you guys are quite lucky to be a part of those institutes named after these two great scholars. And today's talk, as has already been announced, it is on climate change and the Indian economy, vulnerabilities and resiliences. So since my time right up the thing budgeted as very short, so I'll not go into the details, but just briefly introduce the subject in this particular form. See, climate change is something which is not entirely new, or it's not suddenly that we are becoming aware of it. It is actually a continuous process, and in a way, it is also a natural process. Nature actually evolves over a long time, like the universe continuously evolves. Everything evolves. But why it constitutes a major concern now is that the human activities in the last 300 years since the Industrial Revolution has actually expedited the process of climate change. Then beyond compare, it was never so quick and so fast. So this is something which has become extremely dangerous. And so if no actions are taken, so we are heading for great threat to both life and livelihood. People don't realize because it's something we can't obviously see. It doesn't affect individuals in a day-to-day basis, but then it does affect the whole global economy, global society. Actually, it's a global problem, and what the economists would like to call it is it's a global public bad. I'll not take the time to explain this whole concept. So it's something bad, which is a globally, it affects globally everyone, and it's a public bad means that we can't escape it. You see, look at the pandemic. It's also quite a global bad, but it's not entirely a public bad because if you take enough care, probably you can escape it. But climate change is something it will be very extremely difficult for anyone to escape the impact. Of course, having said that, different countries are going to face different situations. All right, and the scientists have been able to come up with the things is that it's a genuine problem. Like unlike many people like Donald Trump, whatever they might be thinking and talking about, it's a genuine problem. It's an impending danger, but it's going to play out in different countries in a different way. Some countries are going to face it a little early. Some are going to face it a little later. But since it's a global problem, so a concerted effort of the global community will be necessary, right? That is why we require protocols and all that. We have gone back a little, but then we have to, I think, revive those protocols. Now, why are countries' studies like the one which Professor Majumdar is going to talk about today is important? Is that I just said that although it's a global problem, it's going to play out in a different way in different parts of the world. All right. As a result of which, different parts of the world, besides their global commitments and all that, they'll have to prepare somewhat differently or specifically in their own context. And I think that is why it's very important for us to know what are going to be the probable impact of the climate change processes in India and how resilient India is going to be to withstand these changes, or how vulnerable India is going to be, and therefore we need to sort of be careful, take action, and so on and so forth. So I'll not like to go on and on. I'd like rather, I think it's time for me to leave the screen for Professor Majumdar to occupy. I'll just say one or two words on him. For those of you who may not have known him, he is a very sincere and a very competent scholar on various fields, which Joydeep has already pointed out, and he speaks very well. You're going to find out very soon if you haven't, if you don't know that either. And what I like about his lectures is that he usually comes up with very pertinent observations, from any sort of surface, which actually adds a freshness to his lectures. And I'm sure, all of you are going to really enjoy the whole lecture session, and hope that you will be also aroused to take, aroused to realize the importance of the issue, and also cooperate with whatever kind of action we can take to be able to cope with climate change. I think with these words, I'll leave for the time being and leave this screen for Professor Majumdar to occupy. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, good afternoon to Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir. And thanks to Joydeep for inviting me to deliver this special webinar series talk. And of course, both Professor Bejbarua and Joydeep has spoken very many things about me. I think that I don't deserve so much of compliments from them, but okay, from a friend and from a senior colleague like Professor Bejbarua, you get them because of their affection. So I take them in that stride. What I'm going to speak on the topic about climate change, Indian economy, vulnerabilities and resilience is a very broad topic, and as Joydeep had suggested that this is a very mixed sort of crowd, and so I should try to have a sort of a lecture which is understandable by the layman also. And so it is not as much about the effect of climate change and those things on the Indian economy as from the macroeconomic point of view, but rather I take this opportunity to come up with specific issues like what causes the climate change and what are the impacts of it in general, and in specific what are the problems that may arise in a tropical developing country like India, how resilience can be built up against the public bad that arises out of climate change, and then how in recent years we have come to face sort of multiple problems at the same time, and how we should change our whole sort of thinking about policy, not only changing the policy, but also how to make the policy. You have to change that also. So with some instances and some diagrams, and of course my speaking, I would try to draw the attention of the 130 odd participants who are here towards these issues. And if some of you become interested in these issues to research them further or to inquire about them further and come up with more detailed talk and papers, that would be my pleasure and success, that if I can get you interested in the topic. With that, I'm trying to share my screen. If at any point of time, if you find that the screen is not visible or if you cannot hear me, then please let me know.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, okay. So with that, I start. Now, if we speak of climate change, then we all know that what climate change is all about. It is about the change in climate. And a major part of climate change that we feel is global warming. And so far as the general understanding of climate change is related, we are perhaps more concerned about global warming and its impact on the average temperature and several other things, but not about some specific events that are associated with climate change. And by that, I mean what in climate change context, we call them extreme events. And those extreme events, what are those extreme events and how that affects the Indian economy, etc. And how these lessons are to be learned. That is the broad outline of my talk today. Now, when I talk of extreme events, as of now, I keep out the so-called extreme events like, say, fire or arson, these kind of man-made extreme events. But I'm speaking of natural extreme events. And when we speak of natural extreme events, we generally speak of a sudden and substantial departure from the normal conditions of the globe, and that would include in terms of what I would say the climatic conditions, as say a significant increase in temperature or a significant drop in temperature, which we call heat waves or cold snaps, a very high sudden increase in precipitation, which leads to, say, cloudburst, floods, etc., or heavy snowfall, or even something like a very low precipitation over a sustained period of time, like intense droughts. And then there are issues like cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, which are extreme events in their own right, because they cause a very sudden and very substantial damage to the world as we know, to our environment as we know, and by environment I mean both the natural environment and the built-in environment that we have in terms of our development process. So these kind of extreme events, which may have some relationship or which may have its source in environmental conditions and climatic conditions, which leads to a very sudden and substantial change in our environment, in our immediate local environment, is what we know as natural extreme events. And what are the consequences of extreme events? If we try to look at the consequences, there are three major consequences. The first is loss of life. Flood, cyclone, even earthquake, heat waves, they lead to loss of life. So that is the first major consequence of extreme events. Then we have something like loss of private property. And by private property, we mean not only the buildings and shelters and dwellings, but also income earning assets like, say, orchards, or say a water body which is used for fishing, or agricultural land which goes down underwater. And third, we have damage to public property, specifically public infrastructure like roads, railways, telecommunication and power infrastructure, dams. So these are the three areas in which we face the negative impact or loss because of extreme events like as we noted earlier. Now, if we try to look at the economic consequences of extreme events, here are some of the major global extreme events in recent years, over the last 15 years or so. And I have talked about up to the year 2019. I have not included 2020 or 2021 in it. So these would give you some idea about what are the extreme events we speak of, and what can be the major economic impact of such extreme events, which lasts for 3 to 7 days maybe, but leaves its imprint for a very long time, even after the extreme event itself has winded down. So from this list, we can get some idea about the economic impact of such extreme events. are these extreme events at all related to climate change, or are they like random events, which we speak of in economics? Now, it has been observed that if we look at last 40 years or so, and we take the sort of 1980 as our baseline, and the number of extreme events like earthquakes or cyclones, tsunamis, etc., or flood, or extreme temperature like heat waves and drought, then we find that almost there has been a secular rise in the frequency of such extreme events in recent years. And we also know that over these last 30, 40 years, there has been a continuous and sustained rise in the global average temperature, and climate has been changing substantially in terms of frequency and duration of precipitation, intensity of precipitation, frequency of other kind of manifestation of climate change, like melting of sea ice, polar ice, and rise of sea level. So there is some link which the scientists argue exists between the increase in global temperature because of climate change and the increase in frequency of natural extreme events. So there is a strong link between the economic losses that arise from the extreme events and the climate change that we have been witnessing over the last 50, 60, 100 years or so. Now, how to tackle those extreme events? So given that what Professor Bezburua had already told, that yes, nature has its own way of evolving. So depending on several natural phenomena and human activities, our environment is changing, and what we have to do is we have to adapt to that, we have to fight that. And how to fight that is what we know as resilience, the power or the strength of human society to fight against such extreme events or natural extremities is what we call resilience. And it is the capacity to respond to or to foresee such extreme events and take preventive measures, then to come up with response and reorganizing after a hazardous event has happened, so that our society regains the normal functioning, normal structure, normal activities, normal economic level. So the power of resilience would mean that we come back to our natural level quite early. It can also be understood if you think of resilience in personal terms, say as human being. Suppose there is an illness. Let us keep on for the time being. I will come to that later. Suppose there is a certain disease or an illness which can strike human being, and when it strikes, we fall ill and we lose our daily activity, the capacity to work normally during our daily activities, and it takes some time to come back again to our normal activity level. So when we speak of that, we say that someone is more resilient means, number one, he or she generally does not fall ill very easily. Number two, even if she or he falls prey to the disease, their working capacity or daily activity level is not hampered too much. And third, they get back to their normal level, they regain their health very quickly. So this is what we mean by a resilient person. Compared to someone whose resilience is low, we speak of a person as his resilience or her resilience is low when they fall ill pretty frequently. And whenever they fall ill, they lose their capacity to do work, whatever daily activities they do, up to a large extent. And they take a very long time to regain their normal activity level. So we can sort of understand what we mean by resilience in the human society by understanding what we mean by resilience for a human being, for an individual themselves. So the three key parameters are protect, that is prevention. Second is maintain functionality as much as possible, and then get back to the pre-hazard level as soon as possible. That would be what we call as resilience. Now, economists are very fond of colorful diagrams, so it would be injustice if I did not have some diagrams in the presentation. So suppose the blue line over there at the top of the chart was the time path of an economy in terms of its average trend over time. That if nothing happens, the economy was growing at a certain rate, certain smooth time path, it would have gone. Now suppose at tth point of time, some extreme event happens. An earthquake, a pandemic, whatever it is. So at that point of time, because of that extreme event or because of that hazard, the level of the economic activities starts dropping very sharply. So it drops along the red line over there. After n periods, the society or the state or the government, whoever it is, starts its response. So at t plus nth point of time, the response starts. And once the response starts, what happens first is that the speed of downfall comes down. So if the speed of downfall is arrested sharply as before, so it still goes down a little bit, but now it goes down at a very sort of decelerating rate. So there is a curve over there. And then at t plus rth point of time, it starts its recovery, that it starts its something like the bouncing back of the drop ball. So it starts bouncing back, and after m periods of time, that is at t plus mth point of time, it regains the so-called level where it would have been, if
Professor
there was
Majumdar, sir.
No, yeah. Yes, tell me.
Please wait.
Okay, that's all. Yeah, you can continue, Rajesh.
Jadip, can I continue?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's okay.
I thought someone asked to stop for a minute or so.
Yeah.
So, okay. So after t plus mth period, what we find is the economy has come back to its original time path. It's that what the economy has lost or the society has lost during those m periods of time would be the total economic sum total of economic activities or values, you can think of it. That is the red shaded area. So this much amount of value of the economy lost. You can think of it in terms of GDP, you can think of it in terms of money, you can think of it in terms of what we are measuring at the economic or functional level. So because of the extreme event, because of the hazard which struck at the tth point of time, this whole shaded region is the damage cost of the extreme event. This is the cost that the society had to bear because of that extreme event. Now, where does resilience come into being? As I said, that resilience. So suppose there are two economies or two societies or even a single economy, one where some resilience measures has been taken. Say in terms of individual, you can think of vaccination as a resilience measure. That if you take vaccine, then even if you fall ill, it will be less intense and you can get well very quickly. So something like that. So if our economy is more resilient, then its response will be quicker, its recovery will start quicker, its original time path early. So this means if an economy does not have resilience capacity, it will lose what the earlier was, the lightly red shaded area. But if it has certain resilience, then it can bounce back and come back quickly. So therefore, its loss is now the deep red shaded area, which which is lower than the earlier one. I think I'm understandable up to this point for everyone, right? That if you have resilience, then your loss because of the extreme event is less compared to a situation when your resilience is low. So that is how resilience is related to the impact of the extreme event. A society or an economy must have certain adaptive capacity, must have certain resilience, so that its cost or damage because of extreme events is low. And so, of course, we have something like this, that with resilience, initial damage or loss is smaller, response is quicker, recovery is faster, and therefore total damage cost will be lower with resilience. And the more the resilience is, the less is your damage cost, quicker is your recovery. But then, how to have some resilience? To build up resilience, you must have certain planning. And that resilience planning must be both before and after the extreme events. In terms of before the extreme events, what you have to do? You have to monitor from where your extreme events can come up, like the early warning system of cyclone. Then you have to build up certain awareness. You have to build up certain insurance against the extreme events. You have to train people regarding how to respond. And then you have to stock up with essential commodities in case of certain extreme events. So these are all things which you have to do before the extreme event strikes. After the extreme event has struck, because in spite of everything what we can do, we can sometimes never escape extreme events, especially natural extreme events. So once the extreme event strikes, then we have to do something as post-event exercises or post-event things. What are they? The first thing we have to do is we have to give the people or the affected part of the society water to drink, sanitation services, food, medicine, etc. Then we have to recover and repair their damaged assets, try to rehabilitate them, and restart the economic activities. So in this way, the resilience planning has to have two separate parts. One part as I said, early warning system or things to be done before the event, and the other part which is to be done after the event. And that planning has to have both local, state, national level, as well as the global level. And since natural events do not obey administrative boundaries, so we have to coordinate across geographic boundaries, administrative boundaries, agencies, jurisdictions, all kind of sort of integrated, coordinated approach has to be taken. Now, there is a trade-off between the resilience planning and the damage cost. If you plan for a very high degree of resilience, if you spend more money on building up resilience, then your damage cost will be low. So what is the trade-off? To reduce damage cost later, one has to spend more on avoidance cost or resilience cost now. Now, what is the problem then? There should not be any problem. We should all try to build up as much resilience as possible. The problem is, as with individuals, with societies, with developing countries, resources are limited. Since resources are limited, we have to optimize our expense. We have to take a call between how much resilience to build up or how much avoidance cost to spend now to ensure that we do not have to spend much on damage cost later. Now I will give an example to make it clearer. Suppose we all are familiar, I mean, people of Assam and people of Southern Bengal over here, we are both this is our annual ritual that we have floods, right? So if a river is flood prone and tops the bank often, what we try to do as a planner? We try to build up an embankment. We try to build up an embankment so the river bank becomes taller and the river does not top the bank as often as it does now. Why we do that? Because we know if the river tops, then there will be a flooded area, and the flooded area will be having economic costs and damages. And so to prevent that, we have to build up the bank, we have to increase the height of the embank. Now, so the choice is something like this, that suppose the topping height, in different years, we have historical data about the topping height of the river, that by how much the water level exceed the danger level. So from normal level, how far did it go? Now, the black line is the height of the bank at present. And we find that in 2015, the topping height was something like the A. In 2017, it was a much more extreme flood, and the topping height was something like C. And in 2020, it was somewhere in between, like B. So now, as a planner, from the economic point of view, what is the dilemma? The dilemma is that should I build up and increase the height of the embankment to A or B or C? Now, obviously, if there was no resource constraint, then C would have been the choice, that I increase the embankment more than the height, historical height of the river topping, that let the embankment go up to the level which has never been topped before in recorded history. So this means I have done as much as possible, and I can now sort of feel a little ensured and safe. The problem is that we do not have that much money. And so if we do not have that much money, what we do? As economists, what we try to do is try to find the probabilities of each topping height. So try to find out that, okay, what is the probability that the river will top by 5 centimeters? What is the probability that the river will top by 10 centimeters? What is the probability that the river will top by 25 centimeters? So given that probabilities and given the damage that follows such a topping height, we can find out what we call in economics expected damage. So if there are certain expected damages, we find that if the river tops by 1 meter, that is the last row in the table over here, 100 centimeter, then the damage is pretty high. It causes a 200 million rupee damage. But the probability of the river topping by 1 meter
Rasi, are you there? Rasi,
I think Sar has lost a connection.
yeah, it seems, but he's re-entering.
Joydeep,
Yes,
I think I lost connection.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
Hear me
Please,
now?
please. Yeah, now.
Yes, you can hear me, but I think you can't see the screen, right?
No, screen is okay. Screen is
The
already
screen is
there.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, screen is already there.
Yeah. So what I was trying to say, if you can hear me for the time being, while I try to
Yeah.
refresh the screen.
Now it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what I was speaking about till I get back the screen is that when we try to plan, we therefore try to plan in a way that getting the maximum return from the money that I spend. So what is done is that we try to spend on resilience up to a point which will ensure me of the maximum possible damage cost saved. So what is done is that in terms of building up of the embankment like that, please bear with me. I'm trying to get back the screen. Have I got back the screen?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sorry. This is what technology does to us. Okay. So now what is done is that I'm skipping these things, is that if you do some sort of economic calculations, which economists are very good at, sort of confusing people with numbers, is that what we find that if there are certain costs of building up the embankments, etc., it would not be a very good idea to increase the embankment up to 1 meter, because the cost of embankment would be too high compared to the cost that I save in terms of probable damages. So in terms of certain hypothetical figures that I have put up on the screen, it appears that if we increase the height of the embankment up to 30 centimeter, then it is optimum for us, because then the difference between the cost of building the embankment and the damage cost that it saves is maximum. So that gives me the maximum return in terms of the gap between the cost incurred now and the cost that I save because of this resilience. So in this way, economist, state, society optimizes between the resilience cost that is to be incurred now and the future damage cost. And it is because of this specific reason that we generally do not ever have what we call a foolproof 100% guaranteed resilience against extreme events. Now, given this scenario, it is also true that therefore resilience planning or optimum resilience build-up is lower in developing countries or developing societies compared to a richer country or a developed advanced country society because of this resource constraints. So as with individuals, a rich person can have much more preventive measures being taken to avoid certain damages compared to a poor person who does not have adequate resource to take preventive measures against future probable and likely hazards or extreme events. Similarly, developing countries face resource crunch, and therefore they are almost always underprepared to tackle climate extremities or hazards or extreme events. One major area of extreme event in India, especially in eastern India, is tropical cyclones. And again, from Assam to Bengal, through Bangladesh and Meghalaya, we know that we are prone to cyclones and the damage that cyclone causes to our society and economy. Now, tropical cyclones in India have sort of a very long history. And these tropical cyclones generally build up because of rise in surface temperature of the sea. And therein lies the link between what we call global warming, climate change, and extreme event. It is observed that the frequency of tropical cyclones and the intensity of tropical cyclones have increased over the last 20 years or so, and which is directly linked to the rise in surface temperature of the sea. And these tropical cyclones have severe impacts. One, they are very high velocity winds, so they damage structures, infrastructure, hospitals, dwellings, etc. They lead to exceptional heavy rainfall throughout the area through which it passes, and especially in the coastal areas, they lead to storm surge and rising wave or ingress of seawater. And the coastal impact is much more significant because of the low, flat coastal terrain, high density of population and concentration of economic activities there. And if the seawater ingresses into the agricultural fields or cultivated areas, because of the increase in salinity of the soil, it damages crop this year and damages the prospect of crop for several years in future. So cyclone management in India has also been taken up from quite a distant past. And in 1969, there were two extensively damaging cyclones in Andhra Pradesh coast, and after which the government of India constituted the Cyclone Distress Mitigation Committee in 1970. And they had a sort of long list of bucket list of recommendations. Installation and upgrading of warning system, pointing out the vulnerable areas, preparedness, construction of cyclone shelters and embankments, creating awareness, and then coordination between several agencies. And what happened was that it led to major initiatives because of the extent of loss that used to happen because of cyclone, both in the coastal areas and in the impacted states like West Bengal, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and to some extent in the Northeast also. And the major impetus that came into resilience building against tropical cyclones was during the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, which was sort of World Bank assisted project in 2006. After which we have had quite a bit of success in terms of early warning system or preparedness in terms of cyclone management. So the first part of being prepared or warning regarding tropical cyclones has become much more advanced and much more good in present years. And that can be seen in terms of the effectiveness of the resilience policy, in terms of the impact that it has had. If we look at, say, about last 20 years, we find that whereas the super cyclone in 1999 caused quite a lot of damage, over the years, especially after the early warning system and other technological measures were taken, cyclone shelters were built up, the National Disaster Response Team started working, NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, started to work, then we have had a drop in at least the first of the impact. Remember, the second slide we showed that the first impact of any extreme event is loss of life. So that has at least come down quite substantially. And the interventions that has helped in building up this resilience has been preparedness, evacuation, clear sort of standard operating protocol and communication chain, and very fast relief and rehabilitation. These four have been the four pillars on which resilience against tropical cyclone has been built up in India. But what has happened in last year and also last week, when two cyclones sort of thrashed the western and eastern coast of India. Since I do not have yet the data on the last week's cyclone, I concentrate on the 2020 cyclone, 2020 May cyclone, the cyclone Amphan, which struck West Bengal. And then we try to understand how one extreme event sort of undermines the resilience or the preparedness of the other extreme event. So in terms of preparedness, what happened? Primarily, as I said, being a developing country, in terms of preparedness against tropical cyclone, certain things were not followed. They were not followed because of poverty, climate-induced sea level rise, erosion, corruption, etc. So the building codes or the coastal zone regulation codes that are to be followed in the coastal areas were not followed. So you have a lot of buildings coming up in the coastal areas, lot of economic activities concentrated in the coastal areas. So obviously, these economic activities many a times lead to loss of the biosphere, loss of the ecosystem along the coastal areas, which serve as a natural barrier against tropical cyclones. Loss of mangroves, for example, loss of sand dunes, for example. So because of these, the damage becomes much more. Secondly, there has been very low operational awareness. Awareness build-up was limited to sort of the official machinery and sort of distributing leaflets among the people living in the vulnerable areas. But no mock drill, no training were done. And because of the lockdown and pandemic, which started around end of March, what happened was that movement of officials in villages for awareness build-up, for identifying vulnerable areas could not be done last year. The second part. Now, when the warning has been given, when we know a cyclone is approaching, then the major activity that is to be followed is evacuation. Evacuating people to cyclone shelters to arrange for their food, water, medicines in those cyclone shelters. Now, what happened was that from March onwards, the cyclone shelters were being used as quarantine centers for the pandemic affected people, for the COVID affected people. So a lot of these cyclone shelters were not available at all for evacuating people into those shelters from the vulnerable zones. Secondly, even if in some places where the cyclone shelters were evacuated before the vulnerable people could be put in them, the villagers, the households did not want to move there for fear of the pandemic or for fear of being affected going into those shelters. And because of the lockdown, transport were not available. There were delay in moving people. And once that was done, in those shelters, the so-called physical distancing norms of the pandemic could not be followed. Essentials could not be arranged because of the lockdown. Adequate quantity of medicines, adequate quantity of food, drinking water, these could not be arranged in those shelters. About the communication and standard operating protocol, what happened was that because of the pandemic, there were less field staff in the area, physical movement of people were restricted, and much therefore depended on the telecommunications network between the NDRF team on site and the officials who were staying at home. So once the cyclone started, or once the cyclone had the landfall, what happened was that there was no power, no cell phone network because of the impact of the cyclone. So as a result, the communication between the field staff and the sort of policy makers or decision makers at the back room, that completely broke down. Relief and rehabilitation after the cyclone, that also became very difficult. There were very few relief staff available. Movements were restricted. And if you think of rehabilitation of the economic activities after the cyclone, then because of the lockdown itself, the economic activities could not be restarted because they were, by law, they were not allowed to restart their economic activities. Goods and services restricted movements, lack of fund because the government had not earned any revenue for the previous 3 months also because of the complete halt of economic activities. So all these affected repair of homes, relocating people from shelters to their homes, supporting their economic activities. All those sort of ingredients of resilience could not be followed. And therefore, if we sum up, what comes up as the impact of pandemic on the hazard resilience? There was slow evacuation, there were inadequate stock of essentials, lack of manpower on the field, there was communication breakdown, there was lack of electricity and communications, and insufficient funds. So we find that one extreme event, one hazard like the pandemic completely undermines our preparedness or resilience for another extreme event, the cyclone. Now the problem is that so far we were not ready to think of many extreme events striking together. And how does it have something beyond? Now see, I have put up a set of photographs. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now the top 3 photographs in the top row, the 3 photographs there, are pictures of the roads in Bhubaneswar, Guwahati, and Kolkata. Not in that order. After the Amphan and heavy rainfall last year. And the 3 photographs in the lower panel are photographs from different parts of the country during this second wave of pandemic, when people are running from pillar to post for medicines, for admission, for oxygen, etc. Now, just think that if the cyclone that came into Orissa this year had been much more powerful and had struck the much more densely populated southern West Bengal, or went on to ravage the northeast, and the roads were waterlogged like those shown in the top panel, how would we have reacted in terms of our response to pandemic? So what the lessons that we get from these events? That we must plan from multiple events and compound hazards, because now climate change is going to bring in or throw at us not one hazard at a time, and not give us time to come out of one hazard before throwing another hazard at us. It will throw multiple hazards at us simultaneously. And in terms of specific sort of events, we have to think of changing the way we think. We have to think of several types of hazards that will be operative simultaneously, and we have to draw up our whole disaster response problem, disaster response policy in a new manner. As a footnote to the whole lecture in terms of the economic impacts, it is estimated that in total around 5 to 7% of India's GDP are being lost in combating climate change induced impacts in terms of both extreme events and in terms of reduced productivity of agricultural sector, food shortage, and inflation. In terms of extreme events like pandemics, we find that we have lost about 12% of our GDP in the last year. And it is expected that this second wave and the several types of mini lockdowns that we are having will cost us around 1.5% of our GDP in the first quarter itself. So this will give you an idea about the economic impact of these extreme events. And when the extreme events multiply and come together, it becomes much more difficult for building of the resilience. And I would end my lecture with this sketch that how it works. We have unsustainable human activities, which leads to global warming and extreme events. In a developing country like India, where still we have a lot of people living in rural areas and we depend on the countryside for our food production, if there is a fall in farm productivity, there will be a loss of income and people will move to urban areas. So what we have is rural-urban migration, a very fast and unplanned rural-urban migration. This leads to overcrowded cities and slums and etc., where the impact, the intensity and the spread of communicable diseases like SARS and CoV-2 are much more. So it all comes in a sort of vicious cycle where the human-induced activities through the climate activities lead to several changes which lead to further losses and further problems for us. With that, I stop. Thank you all for the patient hearing in spite of all the technical difficulties that I faced. Thank you so much. So over to you, Joydeep or Bhaskar.
Thank you, sir. It's been a very nice presentation which covers topics from economic discipline to management and other disciplines. So I now request Professor MP Belbura to kindly initiate the discussion session, and I also request Dr. Upar Kumar Rekha to kindly moderate the sessions. If any questions are there in the chat box, you can put here with the permission of Sir President. Thank you.
All right. So we have all heard into a very intense and detailed discussion. And as Professor Majumdar has pointed out, one impact of climate change, which the scientists are pretty sure of now, is that frequency of the extreme events are going to be higher. In fact, climate change may have various other effects also. Some effects obviously will be more gradual, less dramatic than this one. But this is where he concentrated mostly, is that the extreme events are going to become more frequent. In fact, technically or otherwise, this is also called the case of the fattening of the tails. Those of you who are familiar with a normal distribution, so in the middle we have the normal kind of situations. Take about temperature or rainfall, whatever. Suppose you take temperature in Guwahati, for instance. In the middle portion, you'll find a normal situation. That is what frequently we get. But when the tails are where actually very infrequent situations you get, extremely hot day or extremely cold day, that we get in the tails. But then if the tails become fat, that means the normal portion becomes now less frequent, and rather what was so far abnormal becomes more frequent. So we have this kind of disasters which are occurring much more frequently, and that is why our resilience need to be built up, right? So that is a point he has very amply sort of illustrated. We all sort of buy your argument. I'd just like to add one more dimension, is that some of the effects of climate change are not going to be so dramatic. Actually, they may be quite gradual. For instance, melting of the glaciers. So that's going on for quite some time, slowly. And somebody actually has pointed out hear about the glaciers, because that melting can have a very long-term, gradual but very long-term adverse effect because of shortage of fresh water supply and so on. And in agriculture also, you might find that, say, if I may talk about the Northeast, there are some areas of Bhutan and Arunachal Pradesh where lovely apples are grown because of we have this alpine kind of climate. Suppose the temperature goes up by a few degrees and all that, so those areas are going to become very warm, and instead of apples, probably they'll be growing papayas or something like that. So those kind of changes can also take place. And even within Assam, for instance, if you know about Assam's agriculture, this Boro rice, which is rather safe because it is grown in a flood-free period, so loss due to flood or bad weather, the risk of that is very limited. So if you're growing more of Boro rice, your productivity becomes more stable. Production also becomes stable. But then Boro rice cannot be cultivated in the upper Assam zones because it requires kind of temperature for which upper Assam is slightly deficient. So if the temperature goes up for a few degrees, maybe upper Assam areas will also be able to grow Boro rice. So that may be one good thing, but there can be many bad things, because in the meantime, suppose the Himalayan ice melt, what are going to be the effects of that? We don't know. What will be the nature of the river Brahmaputra and its tributaries? We don't know, actually. So many of the effects are going to be there, which the scientists are, I think, still studying. I think more studies are also required to be more certain about what kind of things are going to be there. So there can be some areas where, actually earlier, if you remember, it used to be called, the whole phenomena used to be called global warming. So on the average, the temperature goes up. But then it was found that it is not going to happen, globally, because in some areas, for instance, they say that, the places like England and all may become even cooler, because the Gulf Stream, because of climate change, actually, the Gulf Stream may change a little, so that heat waves coming, heat sea waves coming from the Gulf of Mexico may actually no longer remain so warm, so therefore we may have various kind of problems. So there are many more effects of climate change, which may be more gradual, but because we are not very aware what exactly going to be the nature of that, probably we have not been able to. So there's a whole unknown territory which are yet to be explored and all that. But I'm not saying that because they are unknown, we should not be taking action. We should all be taking action. And I must thank Rajarshi Majumdar for this wonderful analysis, very analytical kind of presentation. The question answers, I hope somebody will help me. I have got 3 questions. I mean, somebody who has already mentioned about this, what you call, this melting of Himalayan glaciers and all that. And the person whose name is not there in the chat box is only the phone number. Whoever you are, you can identify yourself. He or she has raised a very important issue that we need to, he says the Hindu Kush area, I assume that is, he means the South Asian, basically the whole South Asian region, all right, or maybe the Indian subcontinent. We need to actually cooperate with each other. Professor Majumdar also mentioned that, actually, that the nature doesn't distinguish between national boundaries. So, anti-Pakistanism may get more votes in India, and anti-Indianism may get more votes in Pakistan, but then climate change will affect both of us together. So we should, anti-ism, I think we should, if we have the foresight, if the politicians in the countries have foresight, we should, anti-ism, I think we should abandon and work collectively, cooperate with each other. So it's a very important point you have brought out, whoever you are. Then Joydeep was actually putting up a question. He says about what can be done about resilience regarding regular extreme events. Somehow, Joydeep, I don't like the regular extreme events. If they become regular, they become very much part of the normal distribution, the middle of the normal distribution rather than the extreme. So they need to be also seen. But then, if they are more regular, the uncertainty part is somewhat, I think reduced. I think I should leave Professor Majumdar to answer this question. But anyway, so that is something. So uncertainty is reduced. In that case, the costs and benefits in a better way. And somebody was also mentioning about data. So please, somebody who's in charge of the question, and answers. Can you
Sir,
kindly?
sir, Dr. Utpal Rekha, Assistant Professor from Discipline of Economics, he will be helping you, sir.
Definitely, sir.
Utpal, can you sort of select the important questions from there, use your discretion, and read it out for Professor Majumdar to answer? Maybe one by one, Professor, or do you want to take 2-3 questions together?
Okay.
Okay.
So,
No issue.
sir, already Bezburwa sir already mentioned about the first question. So I just read out the first questions, but the person who asked the questions, his name is not mentioned here. His question is like that: India belongs to the Hindu Kush region. In the latest study, which was done by ICIMOD, that means the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, the region is going to face serious threats due to 1/3 of glaciers melting. I think a regional task force is urgent necessity to prepare for future vulnerability. Also, nations of the Hindu Kush region should come together, fight together, and make their voices. So he, sir, particularly asks you to give some observations regarding this, sir.
I think Professor Bezburwa has already spoken about this, that yes, there is no doubt that we should have regional cooperation. But the problem is that politicians believe in Keynesianism, right? So they believe in the adage that in the long run, we are all dead. So why plan for the long run? So unless we come out of that mindset, it will be a big problem. But I would like to mention that ECMOR itself, I have visited ECMOR a couple of times. ECMOR itself is quite engaged in both policy studies and lobbying for the protection of the glaciers. And in spite of the apparent animosity between different sets of countries in the whole region, a lot of ground activities are actually happening. So let us hope that they strengthen in future.
Thank you, sir. Second question is asked by Ratul Mohanto. His question is like that: adaptations, coping, and resilience, which one is better? Does a heterogeneity character of people determine the choice?
See, resilience is not something which is different from adaptation and coping. So adaptation and coping are part of resilience, because resilience is composed of what we do beforehand and then how we adapt and cope. Right. So we all know that we have to adapt with what cannot be changed and cope with what cannot be changed. So as in resilience terminology, it says that you have to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable. So some of these impacts will be unavoidable, we have to manage them. And some of the impacts will be unmanageable, so we have to avoid them. So resilience would be a sum total of both working beforehand and then adapting and coping.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Third question is asked Bipul Rava. What is your observations regarding the resilience in connection with the present pandemic situation in India?
This requires a much more detailed study by epidemiologists and public health experts. I am not an expert in those things, but from a social science point of view, what I understand is that this pandemic has again proved that public health infrastructure in a developing country like India is one of the major sort of pillar or bulwark against such pandemics. The way public health infrastructure has been undermined, underinvested, and if I use a strong word, sort of systematically destroyed over the last 20 years or so, that should be reversed, and adequate importance must be given on revitalizing the public health infrastructure. Only then we can have sort of resilience against pandemics. Relying on insurance-based private out-of-pocket expense private health infrastructure will not be able to save us from pandemics.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Next question is asked by Arman Hazarika. It is understood that developed countries like Japan, US, China etc. manage their long-term data very well, by virtue of which they are able to predict and remain prepared for any oncoming calamity. What is our state of such preparedness with past data?
Technologically speaking, we are not far behind developed countries in terms of early warning system. Nowadays, we have a very early warning of natural events like monsoons and the so-called unpredictables like rainfall, etc., and other extreme events also. The problem is that while we have developed the state of our technology for prediction, the ground level operationalization of the resilience planning is poor. This is poor because of lack of trained manpower and lack of resource. So those are the two areas where we have to concentrate. In terms of technology, we are not far behind.
I'd just like to add one point here, Professor Majumdar. I believe you'll also agree. You see, if you look at the last few years, the practice of sharing data publicly has somewhat, suffered in India. So we don't have the NSSO data being published. Okay. So what are going to be the exact? There's a lot of debate regarding the pandemic dates, number of pandemic dates in India.
Of course.
And I think the whole picture will be clear only if we get the mortality data. Maybe next year, what was happening in crude death rate in 2020 and 2021. But then if the current practices go on, maybe those data will not be publicly shared. So in that case, we may not be knowing. I mean, data is something, which is a very public good, it's a non-rival kind of a thing. So unless it relates to your national security or something, I think they should be more widely sort of made available for scientists, for researchers, and for the common man, even the journalists, to understand them properly and, make them most of it. I think that will only help to build our resilience against this thing. So that is one concern I have.
Yes, of course. No, I completely agree with you. When I talked about the data thing, I talked about specifically the technological advance in terms of warning of the pandemic, not in terms of...
We have the data, but
what we call the social science data. Yes. The social science data, again, it has been systematically sort of destroyed over the last few years because data speaks for itself. And never the rulers want to come out with uncomfortable truth. And that has been the practice, not for the past 5-10 years, but it has been the practice for I think, time indefinite. The only point is that now we have been accustomed to much more ready access and much more speedy access to data because of the omnipresent media nowadays. So it is very difficult to keep things down.
Okay, sir.
At least, if not in a specific objective manner, but in a sort of a descriptive and overall impression, we get to the truth. People come to know of the truth.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next question is from Joydeep Barua, sir. How can the resilience be built for regular extreme events like flood? Next, what about events like erosion, which is irreversible? It seems that resilience planning has to take note of compounding nature of extreme events these days.
I completely agree with you, Joydeep, that that was the sort of main theme of my talk today, that we have to build up resilience against compound extreme events. And in spite of that, there will be certain extreme events which become much more frequent, which become much more regular, like, say, as I said, flood in, say, certain parts of Assam and certain parts of South Bengal, which occur almost twice every year. The problem is that to build up resilience against these things, we have to do a lot of undoing which had been done earlier. For example, desilting of canals and river beds, which have been completely sort of stuck up because of the large dams. So that is one thing which needs to be done. And those extreme events, the frequency of those can be reduced only with a sort of doing something which will bring down not only the frequency of them, but also the intensity of them. So that is the only way forward. For example, the erosion part which you were talking of, we see that even in Bengal, I know that there are places like the Chor areas in Assam, when we work together, you and me, for the Assam development report. And in Bengal also, we have the whole Ganga Padma basin around Malda and the Sundarban areas where erosion is taking a big toll. The only thing that can be done is to get back to natural ways of stopping the erosion. Man has been the largest land grabber in this planet. Unless we slow down our land grabbing, this will happen.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next question is from Raju Mandal. His question is like that: insurance is one important component of resilience building, but climate change is going to make it inaccessible for people who would need it the most against climate change induced damages by increasing insurance premiums. What's your take on this, sir?
Insurance is a very big thing. And in developed countries, they have extensive insurance coverage against climate extreme events. In our country too, there are certain insurance available to the rural poor, which I think Raju is speaking of, especially the agriculturalists and cultivators. We have things like crop insurance. The problem is that it has to be, in this case, much more state coordinated and risk pooling sort of insurance, because the individuals themselves will not be in a position to pay the insurance premiums. So the state has to pool the risk and sort of pay a large part of that insurance.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next question is from Dr. Dibojyoti Mohanto, sir. He presently working as Dean Study Center of our university. His question is like that: I want to know if there is any initiative taken by the central government of Assam, central government or Assam government to properly assess the economic consequences, radar economic assessment to estimate the economic losses, physical properties normally done, and environmental parameters due to different man-made disasters, or any estimates or restoration. Also, is it possible to numerically estimate the climate change or its parameters? And he also mentioned that he is not from economics background, although he put his questions.
Yeah, this is sort of a very complex sort of question. I would rather request him to look at much of our impact assessment reports that are available from the Ministry of Environment and Forest of Government of India, as also several state level reports from Assam, West Bengal, Orissa, and Andhra Pradesh regarding the economic impact assessment of climate damages and etc. There are a lot of studies done in India, and they are available on the public internet or public space.
Okay. Next, one Kaushilya Losa. He asks, sir, can we know more about resilience regarding landslide?
I am not that much conversant about the specific measures taken against landslides, but you can refer to several of these from one from the ECMOR, and also from several state sort of disaster management reports. For example, West Bengal State Disaster Management Agency the West Bengal SDMA in its website has a report on tackling and managing land erosion or landslides in the Darjeeling area. So these reports would be able to provide information on this.
Okay, sir. Sir, next question is from Jotin Mag. Actually, Jotin Mag has also put the very first question, sir. His question is like that: as an indigenous Assamese, I want an acceptable solutions on influx from Bangladesh, but I but have we any solutions on climate refugee that will come due to sea level rise in near future?
Yes, you see, that is why I said that climate will not sort of be restricted climate change related impacts to administrative boundaries. And really, one assessment says that about 40% of land area in Bangladesh will be lost if sea level rises by, say, a few centimeters. And so where would these people go? And as neighbors, we know that a lot of them will come to us. And that is why we cannot just say that, okay, there will be no impact of sea level rise on India. And you have to work with our neighbors, our neighboring governments, to try to sort of sort out these issues, try to minimize the impact of climate change on the domestic governments and their international influxes. And I'm not sure whether we have still gone to the stage rather, where we have started planning for climate refugees.
Okay, sir.
But that is a very important and pertinent problem. One area in which I would like to direct one who asked the question is that several of the island nations, like say Maldives, like many of the Caribbean islands or islands in the Pacific Ocean, they have started buying up land in Africa, in certain other continents, in case they have to just shift out their country lock, stock and barrel.
Okay, sir. Next question is from Azizur Rahman. In case of environmental issue of global concern like ozone layer depletion, acid rain, etc., how resilience will build up for a particular country against those environmental issues which are globally concerned?
The problem with this is that, see, while climate change is a global problem, its immediate impact in most cases are very local, like the tropical cyclone or the tsunami, or even the El Nino effect, which prevents a good monsoon in India. So that is why, while the whole world is responsible and must work towards combating climate change, countries, societies, localities, regions, which will face the brunt of such changes, will have to be much more proactive in tackling those issues, in planning for how to combat those challenges. So yes, the problem is global, but the impacts will be unequally distributed, and obviously those will be affected more, have much more at stake.
Okay, sir.
Before Paul asks the other question, just Joydeep, just advise me on what time should you close.
Yeah, actually, sir, we are crossing over a few minutes. So I would suggest Utpal to take only one question, and then, sir, we can sum up, because time is a factor also in the online format. So, sir, maybe one more, and then we can go for your comments and then final conclusion.
I don't have much to comment. Anyway, yeah, Utpal, please.
Okay,
the last
sir.
one. Whoever is the lucky guy.
He is Dr. Bhaskar Bhattacharya, assistant professor from our university, sir. His question is like that: could technology be a perfect device to combat the effects of disaster like cyclone, flood, etc.? There are something which I see is beyond our control. Sir, what is your view in this regard?
Technology can be harnessed for warning and for sort of doing several things which would be taking much more longer for people to do. But it is never a perfect substitute. We have to have people as decision makers. Technology is only a tool in the hand of people. So people and society has to come up with policies about how to use the technology, how to harness the technology. It can be only an equipment or a tool to aid us. It cannot be a substitute for us.
Okay. Sir, can I put one, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, during our days when I am students of Guwahati University, and Bezburo sir used to used to explain in environmental economics, and in that paper he used to say how rational human activities leads to collective irrational activities. That is the concept of tragedy of common. I think that concept is very much relevant here, sir.
Right. As I said, in the coastal areas, when you have a lot of poor people who are fighting for their life, for their daily bread, then they would each take a very small step that would maximize their own income, right? Their own livelihood. And taken together, they become an environmental problem. So that is always there.
Okay,
I completely agree with you.
thank you,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you.
So can we close it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we must thank again Professor Majumdar for being so patient to attend all the questions. And really, it was always nice to have you on the board. And if he's speaking, you know that the show is going to be a grand success. I don't have many comments to make. I have made my comments in the beginning and in the beginning as well as in between. Just one more thing. Let us not get too perturbed about the environmental refugees. One of the reasons is that this is not going to happen suddenly. The sea level doesn't suddenly go up by 1 meter or something, unless we have a tsunami. Tsunami is a different thing, but gradually inundating the area. So it is a gradual. So maybe those countries will also be able to adapt. Like Professor Majumdar has said, some countries are already thinking of shifting to higher places and all that. So this happens, but Bangladesh is now in the economy on the rise. Hopefully, they will also be, finding out some ways of coping with this, thing. So, for the timing, world, we collectively can agree on, basically fixing a date on carbon emission, limit carbon emission. Okay, we should try to also limit, methane emission, and that is going to actually be helping us collectively in coping with all the kind of, sort of adverse effects of climate change. With these words, I'd like to sort of conclude. Thank you, everyone, for being there and participating, and of course, Kondorpo Das and the entire family of KK Hendrik University and Professor Kondorpo Das, led by Kondorpo Das. You have organized a very good event, and thank you again for letting me be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, our speaker, Professor Majumdar sir, and thank you, Professor MP Bezbura sir. He has been very kind enough to us, and he has been associated with our university from inception years. I now request Dr. Somista Borua from the Discipline of Economics to kindly offer the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Vascoda. I, Sormista Rani Borua, on behalf of all the fraternity of Discipline of Economics, Surya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Sciences, feel privileged to propose the vote of thanks to all those who have directly and indirectly involved in this lecture event. First of all, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Kondorpo Das sir, for his introductory speech and his continuous inspiration to organize this kind of event. We have been fortunate enough to listen to an illuminating lecture given by Professor Rajoshi Majumdar sir. Thank you, sir, for giving us deep insight to the topic. It was indeed very informative and interesting. My sincere sense of gratitude goes to the chair and today's moderator, Professor MP Bezbura sir, who spared his vital time to grace this occasion. Thank you, sir. I extend my heartfelt thanks to Director Surya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Sciences, Joydeep Borua sir, for his guidance and support. And I must mention the appreciations for the IT cells for their technical support toward the event. At last but not the least, I'd like to thank all the delegates, all the participants, and my colleagues for their gracious presence and active participation and make the event a grand success. With this kind words, we move to the end of today's web lecture. Thank you very much.
Bezbura sir, you wanted to say something?
I think I have said enough. There's no need to say.
Oh,
I have
no, I heard that you wanted to say something when Bhaskar was speaking, so that is why.
Or maybe that was a lapse.
Okay.
I'm sorry for
Okay.
that.
Then, yeah. So thank you again. So with this, we come to an end. So we declare that this webinar is closed.
Thank you, Joydeep, and thank you, everyone. And
Yeah,
thanks,
yeah,
Professor
yeah. Thank you.
Bejbarua,
Thank you.
for kind
Nice
words.
seeing you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.